first I would just tell you a little bit about myself and how I became a forester and how I fell in love with ferns. And then we'll go over the history of ferns and how incredible they are. And then we'll learn the system that's in the book.
Good.
Yeah, and then I have a little hands-on worksheet for you that you get it. And there's no wrong answers, don't worry. So, how I became a forester is like one of my favorite stories. It really is. So I grew up in Brooklyn. And I was trained as an elementary school teacher at Brooklyn College. And everyone my age, especially if you were Jewish, had to become an elementary school teacher and marry a doctor or a lawyer. So, but I'm not exaggerating. And so I did that. And then my junior year in college, I decided to go camping. And I had been camping once with this one person, but never by myself. So I went to New Paltz, where there's this community. Anyone familiar with New Paltz, New York?
Yeah.
Okay, so where I went was on this bus and landed at this community that was on the rocks. And so there was like granite rocks coming down, and you could sit there. And it was just a very 70s place. And then I got help making up my tent and all that. Then towards the end of my trip there, I went walking with this guy that I sort of had a crush on, and we looked around at nature, and then he said, looking at a plant, that's a sassafras tree. And I said, I didn't know that trees had names. And I was very interested in biology through high school and college, but I really didn't know. So then became absolutely immersed in trees. I just went back in Brooklyn, the Brooklyn Arboretum, everywhere. I just was looking at trees. And then in the winter, I came back to the same area, and I walked around in the snow without any shoes on. So I'm walking around in the snow in these woods, and these people are passing by, and they call out, "Are you a wood nymph?" And I went, "Oh wow, that sounds pretty cool." So then they came over, and we started talking, and I told them that I'd become passionate about trees. And they said, "You could become a forester or work in an arboretum." So I went back and I didn't pay any attention. And I continued to finish my degree, and I taught the first time I taught was in a school that was on Long Island. And I didn't know that the kids that were there were having emotional problems. So I didn't know that. I just was there. Anyhow, I had an emotional problem. I wound up leaving after a month, and I went home. And then my wonderful teacher that got me that job helped me take this test, one of those tests that tells you what you're good at. You know what I mean? And so I took she paid for it. It was really nice. And so I took the test, and I found out what I was really good at was creativity. So that has been in the back of my mind my whole life, that I scored really high in creativity. And then I answered the phones. And then, I wound up working at the Environmental Defense Fund very early on on the Upper East Side. And I did fundraising, and I had no idea what I was doing, but we raised a lot of money. And then I was like, I am not living in the city. I love that place that I went to. I want to leave. I'm a wood nymph, right? So I decided that I wanted to leave, and none of my friends, they all said they were going to leave, but none of them were. And there was this mass migration to Vermont at that point. So I didn't know where to go. I just wanted to leave. So I took a map of Vermont and I closed my eyes and I went, shh, and that was Brattleboro. So that's how I got to Brattleboro. And I went so I moved. There's so many amazing people in Brattleboro. So I just found home here. In fact, when I looked up at the mountain from Brattleboro, it was like I was Heidi. I was home. And the mountain turned out to be in New Hampshire. So I didn't know that, of course. Years passed. I tried to go back and teach. I didn't really do well. And so I decide I want to do something in nature. I do. So I applied to the forestry school at UMass. And they said, you can come in, but not your master's. You can come in as a second-degree student. I turned out I was way too progressive, working at the Environmental Defense Fund, because forestry at that point was pretty industrial-based. So by the first year getting there, I realized, wow, I can make this my career. There's something I could do. I went to the 2 years there, and at the end, I wanted somebody to hire me. I so wanted somebody, but there were no jobs. So I started my own business. And I just celebrated my 41st anniversary in business with all sorts of tales, which I won't go into. But along the way, I fell in love with, when I was with this logger, and overseeing a logging job, I was looking up at trees, which is what you're trained to do, see how healthy they are. And I looked down on the ground and there were tracks. And I was like, what are they? And the guy was a trapper, and he went down and he said, those are Fisher's tracks. And I went, if he can know that, I can too. So then I just proceeded to absolutely fall in love with tracking. Started teaching immediately before I knew much. And but I continued on doing that, and I taught tracking. I don't know, I've taken thousands of people out in the woods to learn tracking skills, or how to use a compass, or how to be out at night. And then I have to make reports as a consulting forester. I have like 200 clients, and when they first come into this program called Current Use, which lowers people's taxes if they come in and they manage their forest, and it helps the industry, and it also protects the land. Does people know about Current Use? Some people do. Okay, great. Yes?
I'm trying to remember the full name. I think it's Current Use.
Use value appraisal.
Use value appraisal.
Exactly.
Current use value appraisal.
Right, yeah, that's right.
You have to have so many contiguous acres.
Right, you have to more than 27. So that's my clientele. And I worked in Massachusetts for a while, and then I wound up just being in Vermont when I moved here. And so I started my career, and because I had worked in Massachusetts as an intern in my last year of college, I got to know all the people that the county foresters, is that familiar if I say county foresters in Massachusetts? They got to know me. So when I started my career, they started sending people my way. I just backtracked like 4 steps, right? So I was right up to when I have to write these plans for people to say what's going on in their land, what trees there are growing, what flowers, what ferns, what birds. Or at least that's my approach. Okay, so my approach is to consider the whole ecology, tracks, any animal signs, anything I found. So one of the areas that I was interested was ferns. And there were really no great books out there to help me learn. So I decided I'm going to look into this a little bit more. And the reason I fell so in love with ferns is because of this fern. It's beautiful, right? It also is where the most, let me put it back here. It also is where the most wildflowers grow, in the ephemerals. So you have ginger and leeks and bleeding hearts. All of them grow where there's a bit of that because they like calcium-rich sites. And it turns out that's where the trees grow the tallest and they're the healthiest, in a calcium-rich site, because that's one of the nutrients that they really need that really helps them grow. So how it works is, this growing trees in diameter like this, it depends on light. How tall the trees are depends on the site. The site makes the height. I never thought of that before. And and the diameter is based on light. Does that make sense? Mm-hmm. It's like, it's a complicated concept. There's a measurement that you do. You measure how high the trees are for a given age. And so when you look at the woods and you see trees that are like this and like this and like this, if they're the same height, they're the same age, if within the same species. So it's confusing because we go out into the woods and that's a really old tree. It's like, well, look up. It actually is the same age for that species. Do you believe me?
So if you were to cut the tree and count the rings, you'd find the same number of rings?
Absolutely. It would tell you that it's the same age. Yeah. So are you surprised? Anyone surprised? No. Okay. Yes. Okay. It's really cool. It's one of those things I love to lead walks and make really clear to people what's going on in the forest. Because when people go out and cut trees, and so I'm a forester, I'm involved with harvesting trees, and they say, I'm cutting the biggest trees and leaving the smallest ones, it could be that they're taking out the best growing trees because they grew faster. And so they have a healthier top to it. So this Maidenhair Fern got me to ferns, and then there was nothing out there to help me learn. And I decided that I would write my own book. And I had written, you can look outside, I had written several other books on, and what I'm good at is simplifying information. So I had written 2 tracking books and 2 children's books. And so I started writing this fern book. Well, it took me 4 years. Because to make it simple, I kept on trying different systems to make it simple, but it didn't work. So I would try it out on a person and say, does this work? And then it didn't work. So it took me all that time. And then this last year, I finally came up with a system that many experts agreed with, fern experts. So it's passed by lots of people that have approved it. And their names are on the book, some of them. And then I found this incredible young woman artist, Bryony Morrow Cribs, that's so cute. And we got connected, and it turned out that she's an artist, and this was illustrations. So they had to be scientifically correct. But when you look through the book a little bit, you'll see, like on page 37, the ferns don't look perfect. Do you see what I mean? Mm-hmm. There's a little bit of a torn they don't all have. Oh, yeah. So it became more alive. You see what I mean? Rather than this flat and you'll see through the book that that's the kind of drawing that she did. And then we had 222 emails between us, even though she lives in Putney. And they all had these series because it kept on being corrections. And the funny part of it is that she doesn't like me to tell so much, but I could tell how it was going. By the end of the note, sometimes she would say best, sometimes she would say X's and a little O, sometimes she would say love. So I knew when she was feeling really good and when it was going smoothly, but it kept on going back and forth to create this book. And that's how, and then this spring, it's actually in March, we published it. So it's my own publishing house that's done all my books. If I had to try to find a publisher, has anyone written and tried to find a publisher? Yes? Have you been successful? Yes. What did you write?
University Press of New England published it.
Oh, that's so great.
Yeah.
They published the first book I wrote, Working with Your Woodland.
Yeah.
Oh, you know that.
Yeah.
Okay, that's cool. So, questions about that?
About,
Anything I just said? Like how I was so crazy that I got into this.
Would you repeat what you said about the age of trees, the height?
Yeah, sure. So when a tree grows, its primary energy grows to be how tall it is, because that's how it's going to get the most light. So primarily its energy goes to growing height. And then afterwards, the light helps whether or not how wide it's growing. So if you look at a tree that has a lot of light, the growth ring could be that big. And a tree that doesn't have a light, it could be really small when you count it. Does that make sense? So the height just reflects the site. And it says, given these conditions, this is the standard. When it's 50 years old, it will be this tall, given this kind of site. Does that make sense? You're not getting it yet? Sort of. So now someone else explain.
Does that have to do with species? I mean, whether it's a birch or an elm or?
Yes, the height.
Yeah.
So if you're an ash tree, you grow tallest than any other tree for the same height. And so, what?
grow the tallest, what, say that again?
They have the highest height for the same age. I said that backwards, right? So that's what an ash tree just grows really tall and straight. So it's per species that we're talking about. Yeah. So on to like the amazing parts of ferns that I didn't know, and I kept on learning more and more. As a biologist, it's like gets more and more exciting. Is that ferns are 400 million years old. So what that means is they came out, there was the cyanobacteria in the ocean, and it produced so much oxygen that the plants came on land. So the mosses came on. So until that, there were no plants on land. And the ferns did so well that they kept on growing taller and taller, in addition to lycopodium. I don't know if you know what lycopodium is. It's hard to explain. Maybe we'll see some outside. Along with them, they grew as the height of trees. And then they were growing in conditions, they had some woody parts, vascular parts to them, but basically they could not support themselves. They weren't a tree. They just were growing as tall as a tree. So slowly over time, they all fell down. And created the coal of today. So I wrote a poem this morning. It's in process about this. I really This. So the ancient ones. When you touch ferns, they may slip through your fingers, they may wander through your heart. In spring, when they first begin, they may spiral round your finger when you play the fiddle. And when it is silent again, your thoughts may journey to millions years past, when ferns burnt so black. Now we burn them again, adding carbon to the air. Are the ferns weeping? So along the way, they've made it through 4 extinctions. There were 5 extinctions, but it was before, the first one was before the ferns. And they made it so that like 225 million years ago, when 90% of all living organisms died, the ferns lived. And then they made it through, which extinction do we all know about? The dinosaurs, right. So that's only 65 million years ago. And so the meteor came down and burnt the grounds and the oceans were dry and the ferns survived. So they have a very special reason that they can survive. Any thoughts?
Well, I'm wondering if any of the ferns that we have today are directly the same type of fern, or I don't know the right word for that, but
Yeah, so most of the ferns died out and then they had to reinvent evolutionary. But from 200 million years ago, there are 3 ferns that still survive. Cinnamon fern, interrupted fern, and royal fern are the 3 ferns that are exactly as they were 200 million years ago. So, but other ones keep on switching, and they have variations, and they can keep on creating different kinds of species. Any guesses why they're so good at? Yes.
Simple.
They're simple. Yeah, I like that.
I think maybe, can they like hibernate when there's a lack of moisture and then still be regenerated? It seems to happen out in California where we don't have ferns for a while and then the ferns come back.
Right.
Or after a forest fire, that's the first thing that comes back.
Da-da.
So they
There's
hide
something-
in the ground or
Right.
the root system or a seed
Right.
system.
Or the spores somehow.
So,
Or the spores.
They're very hardy and long living.
So they don't produce by seed. They produce by spores. If we look at the life cycle of the ferns, which is on page 7, there is a secret life to ferns. And it relates to what you were talking about. So ferns start out, they don't start out, but this is one part of their life cycle. The part that we know is the part that's leafy. And then they have spores on them, which doesn't have to be underneath the leaf. It can be it can be a separate stalk, the fertile frond. But they have clusters of spore cases under where they are, and one spore case has 64 spores, and 64 spores, 4 spores are the size of your hair, a thread of hair. So they're pretty tiny. And that's part of it. So then the secret life is that they fall to the ground. I love telling this because it's just so amazing. They form a new organism called a gametophyte. I'll explain how we got that word, because otherwise we've used very simple words through the whole book. Is that the spore comes to the ground and creates this organism that is separate from the other life stage, it can support itself. It creates chlorophyll. It does not need the leafy part of the plant that we think that's all there is. So it can last for a long, long time on the ground, this gametophyte, and just grow. They're so little, and I never see them in the woods. But this year I got a science kit, and I grew them at home, and put the spores, and then the gametophytes came up, and there were like hundreds in this little, and there were this little heart shape, little organisms that were growing there. I was like, okay, now I can see something. So on this gametophyte, so it has separate root systems, produces its own chlorophyll, just to repeat that, is that it has a male organ and a female organ on the same organism. And the sperm from the male swim to the female. And they create an embryo, which then grows into the plant that we see. So, questions about that?
So that male and female part are residing on the master fern that is shedding these?
No, that's only on the gametophyte.
Oh, so
So the gametophyte produces these organs.
So how does that relate to the resiliency of ferns?
So the gametophyte can last for a long, long, long time.
Like when you say long.
I don't know, but it depends on the species, but it really has a long life to it. And the spores they're so light. They don't like seeds have coverings, so they're heavy. Spores don't. So they picked up by the wind, and they can go really far. And they basically need water in the gametophyte and they can last without it when the sperm are swimming to the female.
That's when they need the water.
That's when they need the water. That's the stage that they, not only, when they get to be a plant thing that we know. So questions, you have to have more questions.
How do they ensure cross-fertilization?
Well, that is a great question because they don't always. Sometimes the sperm goes to the same species, and then
The same plant?
the same.
Of course it goes to the same species.
Right, so it goes to the same plant. Sometimes it goes to the same plant that's the same species. Sometimes it doesn't. It swims to another plant, and it could be of another species because there's such variability in ferns. Trees are like, you name birch tree, black birch. But ferns are like, they keep on changing their names because they do a lot of historical research about how they came about. So that's the process. It's swimming, but it doesn't have to end up on the same gametophyte.
Well, the whole point of sexual reproduction is to get diversity, and if it's very common for them to be self-fertilizing, then what's the point?
Exactly. So mostly, it's not the only reason why organisms mate is to have diversity. That's one aspect of it. But meanwhile, a lot of them are going off and finding other organisms. So it's not one way or the other. It's just a lot of variability. So when I wrote this book, like one of the experts that looked at this said, "Oh my God, Massachusetts fern doesn't have the same Latin name anymore," because it derived from a different way than that they had figured out from fossils. They figured out a different path of how the genes, it developed. So
They also use DNA analysis too, I think, to make some determinations.
absolutely.
Now, they can do that now. So.
Yeah, they can. That's right. So it goes to a whole nother level.
Right.
Yeah. And then the other amazing thing along the way, and I'll just read it a little bit, is that in terms of development, So actually, the idea of seeds, that plants had seeds, they didn't know this until, scientists did not know this until the 1850s. They thought it was just magic going on. They didn't understand what was happening. I mean, that just boggles my mind. And then scientists recently discovered that after flowering, broadleaf trees were reestablished. Ferns were threatened by shading from these trees. Evolution led to a genetic modification that allowed ferns to capture a specific gene from a moss-like plant. This extra gene provided ferns with the ability to absorb a broader color spectrum of light. This access to more light allowed ferns to successfully grow in shade. So, I didn't know that until this year. So, right, are you all involved in different, you just keep on learning. So, questions about, yes, good.
In terms of how they reproduce, we live in the woods, and all the ferns slowly take over the flower beds. So, knowing what you know about their reproduction, is there any strategy for keeping them out of there?
Yeah, so they
Cut the spores off before they...
Well, that's because there's a whole nother way that they reproduce, but to create a new organism, this is the way. They spread vegetatively. So you all know this, and like you put a fern and it's like under the rhizomes just spread out, and they keep on going, and it can be really thicket of ferns. So hay-scented fern is one of those, bracken fern,
Sensitive
lady
fern
fern.
is particularly invasive in some cases where it'll just shoot a runner out.
Yeah,
Pretty,
yeah,
pretty incredible.
yeah. So and part of what's going on, this is going to surprise you, is that the reason that they're spreading so fast in the woods is because the deer don't like to eat them. And we have too many deer in Vermont and New Hampshire and in many parts, Pennsylvania. And so when they're eating, they didn't evolve with ferns, because, so what happens is that the trees come out and they eat the trees. And so the ferns grow. So the ferns are sort of like on top of the food chain. Someone just mentioned that to me recently, because other organisms are basically not eating it very much. So, okay, to the methodology of this book. First, in the beginning of the book, it talks about where you can find specific kinds of trees. So on page, it's right in the beginning. It's how to use this book. So on page 2, there's moist habitat, rocky habitat, fertile habitat. And some ferns are specifically geared towards a specific habitat. So you can see the last one, fertile habitat ferns, Maidenhair Fern. That's the fern that likes very rich sites.
So if you're in a rocky kind of spot, then you know that probably the ferns that you see there are in this list.
That is possible, but there are, in addition, sometimes if you're in a really rocky area, that's what's going to grow there. But also there's other ferns can grow almost anywhere. So this is like the typical place that they grow, and they didn't read the book, so they don't always grow in the right place. And in this book, on page 9, you'll see that we use very simple terminology. So on the left-hand side is the terms that we use, and on the right-hand side are the terms that are in fern books that are pinnae, pinnule, leaf loop. Sounds like you know a little bit about this.
Yeah, I've been trying to identify ferns for the last couple of years.
So yeah.
So I have the big Peterson guide,
Yeah.
which is really a great book.
Yeah. It's just hard.
It's not the best way to identify things.
Yeah, yeah. So, but it's much broader. It doesn't just have 28 like this does. It has a lot.
But it is just for the Northeast.
That's right. That's right. I have.
It's a good book.
Yeah, it's a very good book.
revision was really quite good.
Right.
So.
So they did do a revision that made things a little bit more accurate than they did. So what we did was we made it certain that you knew what those words were. So if you looked up in a Peterson guide, you'd know what it was. But we used through the book leaflet and subleaflet instead of pinna, and subleaflet instead of pinula, and subleaflet instead of pinnulate. They're a little bit friendlier, and I'll explain to you how you know which is which. One thing I want to do is pass around. It's not where the stick is coming up is where there's a new fiddlehead growing. So that's just to distract you. But you can look and then
What kind of
come
a
back
fern is
up. What was that?
What kind of a fern is that? Sensitive fern?
I'm not getting there yet. So one of the styles of my teaching is not to just give out names, you'll see.
Okay.
But I did tell you. No, I didn't tell you that. So this chart goes through the system of how you can learn. Can you see this okay? Great. My piano is like, yay, my piano works. There are 4 different groups. The 5th group is unique. It's only one, and that's the Maidenhair Fern, the rich site. But other than that, all of them have many different species that go with it. So there's a simple, and it does it in the book, so I'm just replicating what you'll have as in the book, is that there are species that are coarse, fine, finer, and then those are so different than all the rest. They have 3 parts to them. Can you see the fiddle head?
That little guy?
Yeah, that little guy.
Oh,
So every fern has a fiddle head.
too small to stir fry.
You wouldn't want to, it's not. Only the ostrich fern. So you can see that there is a scissor here that's showing that horizontally this leaf, this one blade is cut when you identify it into what's called a once cut. And then if you look in the book and you find the once cuts, which is page 11, then you can see there's only how many species? Once cut? 5 species. That's it. There's only 5 species that are common that are once cut. And then from there, you can get a better sense of which one this looks like, and then you can go to the page. In this particular example, I'll give you one example. It actually says it on this chart, which you can't see. Page 29 is where you... 25. Sorry. I'm skipping one step here because I'm showing you the chart, but not showing you it in the book. So much. These are the silhouettes, that step, and then from the silhouettes you go to a page. So which one of those silhouettes does it look most like? Anyone? How many?
What does what look like?
This picture.
The rock potty potty.
People agree?
Yeah.
Okay. So it's rock potty. And you'd go to that page, like I was skipping to get to quickly, and then you'd find all this information on the left-hand side that is organized very systematically. My husband went over this so many times. No one has told me there's a typo in this book. He's very, as Laura knows. So there are where it grows, and then the tips for identification. And where it has an arrow, it's the one that helps me know it the best. Then can be confused with. So with what other once cut could it be confused with? So it's not going to go from a once cut for a twice cut because you've already figured out it's a once cut. And then you get little interesting notes. Yes.
I don't understand
Yeah,
once
yeah.
cut, twice cut.
Yeah.
I definitely see the one that has the 3 parts, but the others
You don't get it yet.
seem identical
That's-
in terms of cut.
Yeah. Okay. So take a look in your book. It'll be a little closer. On page 8. It's the same kind of diagram. A whole blade. And then when you think of the distinction, nobody went out and cut it. It's just what it looks like. So the once cut is broader in terms of than the other cuts. There's just like a,
More solid.
it's still, what was that?
Solid,
More solid.
And
Yeah, it's more
it fits
solid.
into the
Yeah,
parts.
it's thicker.
And there aren't any no cuts.
There aren't any no cuts that are common in our area, that are common in the Northeast. There's a walking phone. So they exist, but they're just not here. So that's why they're not in the book. So we can go on to the next cut, which is the twice cut. So can anyone explain what they see?
Fringe. It's fringed.
It's fringe. And how did that cut happen?
So you have the big cut and then you make fringe along each of those little leaflets.
That's right. On the leaflets, the cuts are going to happen vertically.
Yeah.
You were doing horizontally. I was going to.
Okay.
Does that make sense to people? Yeah?
Oh, so the first cut is horizontal and then it's more vertical.
Right.
After that,
Right.
for that next one.
For that next group. And then you can go to that group and you can figure out 2, if you had one. You can look at all these ferns and say, these are in a vase, like a cluster that is very symmetrical. I'm sorry, page 12 and 13. So the difference between those 2 are just whether or not they're in a vase, like whether they're in a cluster that's symmetrical. So think of flowers in a vase. And when you really make a really nice arrangement, you've made it symmetrical usually. So if you look at any of these, like to get an idea, page 34, and actually look at page 35 in the upper left-hand corner, which is on every single page, it shows you what a group looks like. So that's a group that is a vase.
Oh, I see.
Now you see?
Yeah.
Otherwise it doesn't make sense in my words. Pictures, that's what this whole book about is pictures. Otherwise my words can go on forever. So then the second group, they're just more random where they're growing, but they're still twice cut.
Okay.
The thrice cut one, going back to page 8. So what happens from the twice cut to the thrice cut?
Horizontal cuts on.
Yeah, so that scissor shows you that it's going horizontally. So it's making a very fine. So we're getting from coarse to fine. Make sense? Okay, so,
Like
and then,
serrated fringe.
what was that?
Like serrated fringe.
Yeah, yeah, exactly. And then the last part doesn't count about cuts at all. It's just if there's 3 parts to it. Like this.
Sort of like poison ivy leaves.
Yeah, exactly.
Oh,
Wow, I never thought of it that way. Yeah, Yeah, 3 parts to it. And so you don't have to know anything else about the cuts because you can get that from a distance. You know, you can just see, oops, that has 3 parts to it. And if you look at the 3 parts on page 8, no. You go to, oh, and on the side, there are the little black little notches, marks that show you which group that you're in. And they're in alphabetical order by common name within the group. If you turn to page 63, which is this the same as this fern up here, and you can see how the group picture shows how flat they are. You know, it's like a flat kind of look. Okay.
That's harder to identify with the grape fern and the rattlesnake. Those look like, so you would know that's 3 parts, the one on page 16 I'm looking at, because the ones that are going up are coming from the same stalk.
Right,
So you know it's not just a separate, that's the 3rd part up there.
right.
Oh, wow.
So those are the leaflets that are coming
Oh,
apart.
they're not.
And so when you know, what you can do is, I don't know which one it is, but you got to thrice cut. I mean, you can then look through each one and say, oh my God, I'm not in a rocky area, I'm in a rocky area.
Yeah.
So I have a little game to play. And so if we just do it 2 people, and maybe I'll just give you 1, 2. And turn to page 5. Is that 5? Okay. And then if you could 2 look at it together, because I want you to talk with each other. That's why I'm.
Oh my God, we have to talk.
Yeah.
Can we use
You
our
have
book?
to no, you got to put your book down. Thank you for that question. I had no idea that anyone.
What's the point of the book? If you can't use it, I thought that was the point.
That is the point when we go outside. But this is going to help you
Okay.
get there. Not everyone has this
It
quick.
should say 5 at the top, right?
This should say
Yeah.
5. If I gave you 6. Okay. So what I want you to do is look at these and label them once, twice, thrice, or 3 parts. So just write in a little box and talk to each other so you can figure it out. Now you can't tell the difference between one in a vase and one is in a not vase, so they would still just be 2. Twice cut.
Oh, twice.
Yeah.
We're doing the 5.
We're doing page 5. Yeah.
That's the unique.
Right. You need to stand.
Glasses on.
That is like
Oh,
what?
good.
This is 3
This
parts.
is perfect.
Twice of
Perfect.
these.
Yeah. I think so too. Yeah.
This is
You have to agree with each other. You have to agree and see if you can get
if you look at it like that.
it. You have to look really carefully.
Show me one that looks like that.
This one. See how this has the way I would like
Right.
you have the 1 pattern.
Okay, so the one way that I teach is that it's not a right or a wrong for your parts. I'm going to tell you the answer, and then you can see why it made sense or it doesn't make sense. Does that make so? The once cut is the arrow going to the right.
Oh.
That would be easy. That would be easy.
So how many are confused when I just said that?
That may be the only one cut, I guess.
How many are confused or does it make sense that that's once cut? Well, now that I say it, does it come back? Yeah. Okay, so the 2 twice cuts, you don't know this, but the one that's in the vase has the arrows in both directions.
That 8, that 2A.
That's 2A, yeah. But you wouldn't know because you don't have that group picture to tell you that. I'm just telling you that.
What's the 2A?
Um,
Must be what's in the book.
So
We're not supposed to be looking at.
2B
Wait a minute, But
is,
why are you saying those letters when that's what's in the book you're talking about?
Yes.
Because it's not on that piece of paper.
no, that's the whole point, is that you were supposed to write 1, 2, 3.
How many cuts?
How many cuts?
Not
But
the,
you're
A,
saying
B.
letters B and A.
It's because of the.
No, that one group has 2 different parts. One that's in a vase for 2, and one that's not in a vase.
Oh, that's right.
So that's why it's 2A and 2B. And it's clearer in the book. But now, I'm just telling you that.
Yeah, but we're not supposed to be looking at the books.
It's okay, you know, it's all right. I don't know. The law, I promise you, God will not strike. Okay, so thrice cut is the one with the X in the little,
Oh, yeah.
I see.
in the little
You see it now?
Oh, this one.
oblong
Yeah.
shape.
You couldn't really.
So you have to look closely. Now that I say that, look a little closely and see if you can see that thrice cut.
Now,
It had the X in there.
in that case, the third cut doesn't seem to be going all the way into the vein there.
It doesn't. Right,
It's like a little notch.
right.
Little notch.
It's
But
more of a
that
notch.
matches it.
Uh-huh, yeah. And then the 3 parts are the little smiley.
Right.
So you see the 3 parts to it? And then my favorite, shouldn't do that, right? Is the heart, which is the Maidenhair Fern. Okay?
Just the what?
The Maidenhair Fern.
unique.
So I'm just going through this one cap. You can take this and then you can figure out which species it is, but I'm not doing that right now. I'm just getting you to understand the methodology.
Yeah.
Okay, that makes sense.
So who doesn't get it yet?
What did you say the smiley face was?
The smiley face is the 3 parts.
That's what I thought, because
Along with the one just because
I
of
can
that.
see. I was
The one before that was the
helping
thrice
you with
cut.
those silhouettes up there.
Oh, 3 parts.
3 parts.
This is a thrice, yes.
You getting it? Okay. So now turn the page over to 6 and see how you do there. Now that you've gotten.
Well, they may not be the same.
Oh.
I mean, this is a 3-part.
So I'm going to go over it so we can get outside.
Something has to be.
It got sunny, you guys.
Oh.
Wow. Okay.
Yes.
So,
always been taught that.
so the first cut is the smiley face. You see that little, like one of the leaflets is broken? Isn't that? I think that's.
Oh, that's.
I love it. Yeah, that's a once cut.
The smiley face?
Yes.
I thought I saw a serrated edge in there.
Ah, there is a little bit of a serrated edge.
That doesn't count.
It doesn't count, especially since it's the degree, you know, of which. Because when you get to the other one that has those cuts, you'll see the difference. So we have twice cut. There's 2 of them. One is the group one, which you would not know, is the bottom left. And the other one that's the 2 is the bottom middle. Thank you. You know when you make a mistake when as a teacher and you write on the book? It's yours to get me correct. Okay. Okay, so so that's the 2. And then the thrice cut is the X with the little, in that little oblong shape.
I found it very, very hard to see. I did it kind of by process of elimination because
That works. You'll see it in the book. It will be blown up a little bit more. But, and it could be that the next time I do this, I blow up a leaflet so that people could see that a little bit more. That might work better if I blew up one of the leaflets. Okay, so then the thrice cut is the X with this oblong. And then I said that already. The arrow to the right is the 3 parts.
How do you get 3 parts?
You can sort of see that there's 3 triangles.
On the bottom, but that piece that goes up at the top doesn't.
That's the fertile frond.
That doesn't count.
That doesn't count.
It's just like another version of all these things here.
Yeah, that's true, but still there's
Right.
1, 2, 3.
So, and the last one is my favorite. I had to do it twice. So that is the unusual one. So what did you think about this exercise? Did it help?
Yeah.
Okay, great. So now take your books out. Remember, don't do this. And we're going to go outside and we're going to look and see what they are. And just to back up, knowing the name is just the first piece of information. That helps you then look it up in a book or know more information. But being there, just being and enjoying is much more important than figuring out exactly what it is. So just keep that in mind when we're looking out there, that we're going to enjoy ourselves. Okay, great. So these here, spread out a little bit, and then take a look at this bunch here. Your first job is just to describe to me when you get there. I'll ask a question.
No, thrice. Yeah, thrice.
Right?
So is this one of the finest ones? Can you see that? That, can someone describe what they see for me? Nancy, you seem like you got it.
Well, it's a thrice cut that's not, well, phased. It's got the spore growing on the back
Spore
side.
cases, yeah,
Yes.
growing on the back cases.
Yes.
So we have, does that make sense to people that it's that fine?
Would
You'll
you call
get-
this vase or not vase?
None of the thrice cuts are vases,
Okay.
so it helps. This I call a mess. A mass. I'd say a mass, not a mess. Sometimes it feels like a mess when it's so many.
What do you do about a native invasive?
A native invasion, that's
Are they-
very
do they like them or
controversial.
not?
First you try to fight the Fish and Wildlife Department to get more hunting, whether you're in New Hampshire and Vermont, to bring down the population of deer. Second, there are chemical controls, there are manual machines that go through and pull out some of these when they're in masses. So, does anyone think this is, does people see why it's thrice cut?
Yeah.
Okay, so then if you're in thrice cut, then you can look at all the ones that are thrice cut. And there's only, how many are there?
5.
5, exactly. So you can go through each one of these and then look it up and find out more information about why I think it's one or the other. I'll give you 2 pieces of information. Fragile fern and bulblet grow in rocky areas.
Right.
So if you go to page 56 and you look at the picture on 57 and you look at the blow up,
That's it.
Yeah.
Okay. You got it.
you see that it's thrice cut. Now turn to the next one.
59, lady ferns.
Lady fern is also
Oh, stop. That's like
thrice cut. And Spinulus, our evergreen wood fern, are also thrice cut. So then here are the clues to help you figure it out which one it is. So I took out 2, and then you have to look closer now to see which one it is. And look at the keys. So, hay-scented, stalk below the blade is slender, brown or black, especially closer to the ground.
This is
Lady fern has slight groove and stalk below the blade has thin scales.
I think it's hay-scented.
Spinulus evergreen wood fern. Stalk below the blade is densely covered with large brown scales.
Pretty smooth.
So our conclusion is
Hay-scented.
hay-scented. Does that make sense? Okay, so we got hay-scented.
Does it smell like hay?
Try it out.
I don't think so.
No.
No, doesn't smell like a hay mow to me.
Oh, when it's dead?
It does to
Well,
me.
you can actually get a whiff of it every once in a while.
Oh.
Do you smell it? If you crush it. No, try crushing it. I mean, I'm not worried about destroying these, so you can.
Oh, yeah.
So we got it. So we're going to turn around and we're going to look at another fern that's different. And which fern might I be talking about? Which, can you point to the different one?
Like that third cut is a scallopy.
Twice cut.
Oh, you're talking about this one.
Now, why would you say it's twice cut? What do you see?
Is one
vertical
cut
and then horizontal.
It's twice cut,
Yeah.
Right.
and it's vase.
And
Oh,
it's a
right.
vase.
Correct.
Yep.
Absolutely.
I know
And
and it's,
this one really helps you because it has the spore cases. You see them? The fertile leaflets in the middle.
Yep. You
So
see them all
it-
over the highway, so after a while, it's just like
It kind of,
common.
what would you say it does?
Do they all have that?
There's a word.
No, there's only
that will
some
help
fronds
you.
that have that. Only fronds that are fertile.
Oh, that's what that is.
See? So
See back
that
here?
one right there,
Yep.
this one here,
Yep.
but this is not a fertile frond. This is a fertile frond.
What are you seeing? So they are
of the big-
interrupted
And that's what gives it
leaflets.
its name.
Like
They're
all of a sudden there's
interrupted, yeah.
gaps. Oh.
Exactly. Interrupted, interrupted.
Oh, that's
And just
why.
to make you feel really good, it says it in the book.
Yes.
Interrupted fern gets its name from the fact that the fertile leaflets, when present, grow in the middle of the blade
Now I see it.
and interrupt the other leaflets.
I love it.
Driving down the highway now. When
Cool?
Yeah.
I thought these were shriveled up old dead leaves.
That's right. It does look like that. But when it first comes out, Laura, it's green. And later it dries out more and more. So that helps you as over time to know what it looks like in different seasons.
Yeah.
It's
Yeah.
green
Smaller?
in that same shape.
When it first comes out, it's green and it's really short. It looks more like in the book on page 31, cluster of spore cases, fertile leaflet. It
Oh,
looks,
yes,
You see
yes.
that?
Yes.
It's much thicker.
Well, that's fun.
The three ferns that from the Ozymandias ferns, is that correct? They're the ones that Lynn mentioned earlier. They're really the grand ferns as far as I'm concerned. It's the cinnamon, the royal, and the interrupted, and they just are absolutely luscious growing ferns that they can so dominate.
And what's
So
the other
beautiful.
one? The fourth one that's not in this group.
Probably the ostrich.
Exactly. Yeah, that one can grow.
Yeah, that's the really big one.
Really big one.
That's the fiddlehead one.
So we're gonna go. So do people get that this is pineapple?
What?
At least I got you to laugh. Okay.
It's interruptus.
So I get that it's interrupted. Okay. So let's look over in that patch over there. And you have these ferns.
Yes, I do.
So the first thing I want you to figure out is how many cuts there are.
3.
3. Okay. Do people believe that?
Yes.
If you don't get it, definitely raise your hand and let me know. So the next, there's lots of things you can do from that point. You can look at all of the ones that are thrice cut again and look at the stem below the blade, the stalk below the blade. And what do you see? This is the tricky one. This is hay scented again. And that's only by over and over again that you get it. But what's the different fern here?
Oh, over there.
The interrupted.
The interrupted fern.
Yeah.
It's growing right on our septic system.
Oh, okay.
It's not a problem.
So this is the same one that we were just looking
So do people get why it's
at? But it's
the same?
Yes.
Oh, good. So hay scented, masses of hay scented, masses. Okay, so we're going to walk down the, and just keep on checking what you're seeing. Oh, cool. So come on our trail. This trail goes around the 70, 80.
See raspberries.
Oh, nice. Not just mine, there's 9 households. Yes, raspberries.
Black
That's like the
raspberry.
most important thing right now,
Right.
right? So if you stand here, when you get here, I want you to look around and see there's a fern that's different again.
Here.
Right there.
This.
The low one.
Oh,
The low one.
Oh, this guy.
Single
Yeah.
cut.
Do you see that?
Yep.
yep, right there.
Now let you know that. So now this is the
Sensitive.
trickiest one of all. This is the tricky one. How many cuts are there?
One.
One.
One, but it looks like a little bit like 2 because it's wavy,
Oh, yeah.
right?
Yeah, it's,
Sensitive.
So, and you'd be, this is the fern that if I'm putting in a logging road and there's lots of that, you go, uh-oh, this is a really wet area. And I might not be able to tell except from that. So there's 2, does that make sense that it's,
Yes.
that
Yep.
what we have? I'm not sure.
And what do we have?
I think it's
Sensitive fern. That's what
But
I was-
is it a
sensitive fern.
Page 26.
Sensitive to the frost.
Oh.
Pretty hardy,
Perfect.
pretty hardy
Pretty
otherwise.
hardy,
Pretty
right.
hardy otherwise.
But it makes a great
stalks.
dried
That's something
fawn.
else.
Yeah. Sport fawn for my reeds. that I
Yes.
make. Yes.
So check out the spore, the fertile frond that you can tell in the winter that it's sensitive fern because it has that it has
Must be this right there.
the fertile frond that lasts all winter long.
Dark brown. Oh.
But you got it right away. So you see on page 27 the little, and it's, so that's why it's also called bead fern.
Wait,
Yeah.
here.
They're showing on the vein.
So there's another fern right here. I know there are raspberries, so if you can part from the raspberries.
If there's somebody who never had a black raspberry.
What was
they
that?
probably could-
There's one
They're so
over
good.
here, and then there's one over here that's a new fern. Just look around. See if you can see something that does not look like a hay-scented fern
This one doesn't look like a hay
or a
center.
sensitive fern. Got to get close. The only way you can do ferning is to get close.
Yes.
The idea of eyeglasses was
No, because
really
there's only
helpful.
2 cuts. I only see 2 cuts.
Because that looks a different color too, right?
Oh, that one right here. This one right here. Right here. Yeah, this thing.
It's over here and it's over here,
Yeah.
the one that we're talking about, and I'll pick it.
Very. Oh, the stimulus wood fern.
So This is twice cut.
Oh, that's twice.
Now you see, it has a little frill, but not as much as the others.
What do you mean?
The third cut that you think of, it's really doesn't really have it. It's just smooth, but it has a tiny, tiny little bit. It's just not as much.
And it doesn't count.
Right, right. It doesn't count. It doesn't count. So if you look through, it's not. Do you think this is in a vase?
Wait, where'd it come from?
In there. In that. Here's one, here's one, here's one. So now you can flip through the twos, the ones that are not vase-like, and you can sort of, I mean, you can actually get it from the whatever you call these? Silhouettes. Thank you. There he is.
Too big.
So, look at this. What's unique about this fern?
Oh, the bottom pair of leaflets angle downward and forward. Oh, I don't see that.
I see it.
This right, these guys?
The little ones at the bottom.
Its shape is more kind of,
It's wider in the middle, are you saying?
yeah.
So then that
And
makes
it has the sparser.
yeah.
So, look at the one that goes really, really, really down little.
Oh,
Rust,
At the bottom?
Yeah.
Silvery
or
spruce.
the crested wood fern?
Oh, rust.
Which one?
Yeah.
I don't know.
Look at this, and then look at the
Yeah.
silhouette.
New York.
I'm also
Oh, New
kind of
York,
going
yeah.
by the habitat in this case.
You are?
Yeah, because it seems like a lot of the ones that are,
Wow.
they
46.
require more moisture.
Yeah, you can find this anywhere.
You really?
Yeah. They're just in
But
masses.
I'm eliminating the other ones
Yeah,
because.
that's
yeah,
perfect.
Yeah.
Elimination works really good.
Well, that's most nature ideas.
Yeah, yeah,
Process of
absolutely.
elimination.
Oh, she's-
So if you go to New York, Fern,
Yep.
What she's talking about.
Right.
Yeah.
what
Yeah,
page
you can find
do
it.
we go
46.
to?
Throughout the
46 and
46.
47.
Thank you.
Leaflets
Dense
dramatically get
understories
shorter
of New
toward
York fern
bottom.
heath.
So, note,
Wow.
a humorous hint for remember this fern is when in New York, we always burn the candle at both ends.
So when it says that there's these three ferns that can interfere with the regeneration of hardwood forests,
Yeah.
do you advise what? People dig them out somehow?
No, just being aware of it. No, it's really getting rid of the deer.
Alright. Getting rid of the deer.
So, shooting antlerless deer with bows or muskets is all that. In New Hampshire, you can shoot them with rifles, but not in Vermont.
And the big thing of what you're saying is because some of us missed.
Oh, so the big thing is that they're eating everything else. Let's see if I
All
can.
the young trees.
They're eating all the young trees. They're not any here to show you. When, maybe further down I can show you a young.
Oh, look at that.
Wow, what tree is that?
Been eaten.
Oh yeah. What do you see when you look at it? Bark. What's the most common characteristic of it?
Falling or something.
Tall, slender.
Tall and slender,
Shaggy though.
shaggy.
It's not shagbark tree though. That's different bark.
It's like a birch.
Big,
Looks
What?
like a birch,
chips
but it's,
coming off.
Do you see? Those are big, big pieces,
Yeah.
aren't they?
yeah.
Anything else you see on the bark?
White spots.
Well, the horizontal.
Mold or
Lichen.
lichen.
Yeah, I see lichen.
There's lines across
The
it,
horizontal.
There's
banding,
lines
which is-
across it.
which looks like a beach.
No,
It dries outward. I mean,
So with all of those together, the key here is that the lines go across. That could be another species, but all the birch have lines growing horizontal. That's how they breathe. So you have the choice of black, yellow, gray, and white.
gray.
Gray.
black.
A black birch.
We got
Black's mostly white.
Yeah.
You got white?
Black is mostly white.
Not the blackbirds we have around.
Well, okay, so there's so much
Yeah.
variability in species based on the fact that if you just think of our species, how many colors are we? So one species range. So it's about looking over and over again and getting the broad range of what it could possibly be. Sure, I don't know. I'll tell you.
Yes.
It's black birch.
Oh.
It doesn't look black, does it? But it doesn't look gray. Once you learn more, gray is mainly white with black under the branches.
Yeah.
So if you had more information, you'd know that. And yellow is yellow. But it's not really yellow, it's golden.
So some of what looks like white birch may be actually gray.
Gray birch, that's right. That's right. But that black underneath, and they have totally different looking leaves. So that helps too. And the gray birch grows in areas where it's just been cut. It's an early successional species. It comes in first. Okay, I love it. I could talk about trees all the time. Okay, because I do lead tree identification. Of course. That's what I do. Good that your pants are. There are so many books on trees. Mark Michaelis.
A simple version.
Yes.
Simplified.
This is all hay-scented fern.
Lynn, would you say they're the most common?
I don't know if it's the most common. It's very common. It's very common. So I pulled this one up. It was growing on the outside of our garden for you to see. Otherwise, you would all have to traipse through my garden. It wouldn't work so well. So the first thing I'd be asking, is it really, really finely cut? Is it really coarse? Can somebody describe to me what the cuts are?
Pretty coarse.
Pretty coarse.
So that would mean it's twice cut if it's not.
I think it's twice.
Looks twice cut.
It looks twice. There's a
Does it
little bit
make
of
sense?
Fringy on the side. But
Little bit of a fringe, but
not enough.
not enough. So this grew not in a vase.
Okay.
You could pass it around if you
Good.
want.
That makes sense. We know it's 2B.
So we know it's somewhere in 2B, like you just said. So if we just scan through,
Sporangia.
2B in the silhouettes. So what do you notice about this one that's really different?
They're not very flat.
They're not very flat.
I'd say Long Beach.
Long Beach, maybe.
Long Beach.
Yeah, I'm going for Long Beach.
How did you figure that out?
Two lower
Because
leaves.
it's got, sort of got
This
below.
is the fern
like
that
sticking
welcomes you
Yeah.
into the forest because its arms are reaching out.
No, which is the,
Does that fuzzy
says right in here.
Yeah,
Long Beach.
a little bit.
Very fuzzy, yep.
Here there.
Very
Down
bit.
forward.
But the shape of this
Yeah.
really gets us there pretty quickly.
Right.
Do people get it?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah? Okay. So how many ferns have we looked at so far?
4,
3.
3,
5.
4.
We got hay, what was
Eight.
Hay scented,
hay scented,
sensitive,
sensitive,
New York.
New York,
Long Beach.
Long Beach,
And interrupted.
and interrupted.
Oh, interrupted.
That's 5.
Wow.
I'll show you one more fern, and otherwise you're going to be over the top in terms of learning. But you know the system.
Yes,
Okay,
definitely.
So
so
helpful.
that's
Yeah.
what
And
it
the
is.
different, all the different things.
Wow.
Okay,
Certainly
let's
gotten a
look
lot
at
taller.
another one.
No.
Now, why I picked that is because if you see one fern and you want to know what it is, do not pick it. If you see 2 ferns, don't pick it. When you get a little bit more, then it's okay to think about picking. I mean, that's the Native American tradition. Just get more before you start picking them up. Hay scented, hay scented, hay scented. Hay scented, hay scented, hay scented. This is the boundary line. These big trees are growing here. It was all pasture, and they left. That's what they did. They historically left trees on boundaries. So it's like 250 years old. That sugar maple and that beech was really beautiful, but it did what old trees do. If you're feeling confused, there's only 12,000 species of ferns in the world. And there are 300 species of moss right around Vermont.
So when are you writing that book?
Not, it's been written. It's hard to simplify everything. I am talking about, this is not, I mean, I'm playing with the idea of, not as identification, but just interest of native tree flowers and by color, because nobody knows that trees have flowers when they're native. So that's some playing with the idea, but I'm playing with a few ideas. Yeah. Oh, look, so cool. Don't forget to pull it up under and you can see all this. Look.
Right.
Can people, have people look? You can't see it from a distance. I know you can. And you can look underneath, Laura. Pull up, just pull up a frond. No, it's not a distinctive. Yeah. Do people agree that this is thrice cut?
Right. What?
No.
Yes. Okay. Okay. So what is it? As a glee.
Christmas fern.
Oh wait. Well, how many cuts?
Oh, one cut.
One cut.
Okay.
With a
Good.
slight serrated edge,
A slight serrated edge.
but it's not cut in.
The ear.
Like a,
Yes.
like a,
But it has
Yeah,
the ear on it.
Has the ear.
Exactly. So that's the. So if you go to can be confused with, which also stays green. This is evergreen, and it says it for each one. It says whether it stays green or not.
Where does it say that?
Underneath the second, third one down, tips.
tips for identification.
So the rock polypody also stays green, and it's in rocks.
Shows up more than the
But it does not have that little bump or ear.
So,
So
way,
the variability of, like, if it is alternate and opposite, like in trees, it changes. It's not a true test. But only in a couple, and it says in here where it says it's alternate or it's opposite,
yeah.
but otherwise it changes as it goes up and
You can see
down.
on the
It's called Christmas fern because it's evergreen, and it was traditionally used as decorations at Christmas time
By early
because
settlers.
it's green.
So people would cut it and put it in a vase, you mean?
Yeah, or would decorate it around with the cornucopia or
And it stays green
Santa or whatever.
Oh,
To the point where
okay.
they used so many of them, it was kind of like maybe endangered for a while.
Ah, really? I didn't know that. I want you to walk away feeling confident. That's my goal. Do you feel confident?
A little bit. I mean,
A little bit
that's
more.
in general.
It's a general, okay. It takes time. It says the easy way. It's an easy way, but it still takes time because it's about picking up whether or not in the spring it looks a little bit different, whether it has a fiddlehead, what the fiddlehead looks like. You know, that's all pieces that, you know, you just pick up over time. Questions before we go into another
Can I
life?
buy some books? Recently, in one of the news programs, I heard there was a fern that's called climbing fern that was thought to be extinct, but between the cooperation of the power company and I think the Forest Service, am I correct?
Yes.
It's there,
They
it's
found
climbing under the lines, the power lines.
Yeah.
I was amazed. It doesn't look like this kind of a fern.
So
They're called climbing.
Yes.
yeah,
And they
yeah,
have
And
a
so
broader leaf.
They just
Yeah.
wouldn't have
It's
to
more
get
like
too
a
close to the post.
vine of a broadleaf vine.
right.
I was amazed.
Yeah, yeah. I have a book from this fern expert from 1910. And what she did is she did shadow pictures of ferns. And it says in that book in 1910 that it's almost extinct.
Well, we have it now.
There's about 65 species in Vermont of ferns. We have the most of all the New England states of varied species. So, you know, but this is what you're going to see. This 28, you know, if you keep on at it, you'll maybe find something else. Thank you.
Thanks.
Great. Yeah. Wonderful.
Thank you, Lynn.
Lynn.
Great.
Yeah.
So if anyone wants to buy any of the books, I'm going up. I'll sign books.
How about some applause for Lynn?
Good job. Okay, so the first question is,
Thrice cut.
and look at the base of it. Remember,
Has a little bit of scales on it.
right? Yeah.
So
So thrice cut. Stalk below the blade is densely covered with large, light brown scales. It's a kind of wood fern. Yeah, it's probably an evergreen. So I'm done.
okay, thanks.